Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's dive into the top stories this hour. The United Kingdom and 27 other nations have urged an immediate end to the war in Gaza, condemning Israel's aid blockades and civilian deaths. Israel responds and calls the statement disconnected from reality. Local health authorities report that at least 12 Palestinians were killed and dozens wounded by Israeli tank shells fired at tents housing displaced families in Gaza City. The strike occurred north of Shati refugee camp. Ukrainian President Zelensky says fresh peace talks with Russia will begin on Wednesday in Turkey, the first in nearly 2 months. The Kremlin says both sides still hold diametrically opposed positions. The death toll rises to 27 in the Bangladesh Air Force trainer crash, according to the Special Assistant to the Chief Advisor for Health. The plane slammed into a school and college in Dhaka, leaving dozens more injured and hospitalised with burns. Chinese officials and state media are openly backing Taiwan's opposition ahead of a recall vote that could shift parliamentary power. The vote comes as President Lai's party struggles to advance defence and budget plans without a legislative majority. The US Justice Department has released over 240,000 pages of documents on Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1968 assassination. The files include FBI records detailing surveillance and efforts to discredit the civil rights leader. Brett Hankinson has been sentenced to 33 months in prison for violating Breonna Taylor's civil rights in a deadly raid back in 2020. He is the only officer convicted in connection with the high-profile police killing. Iran says it will not abandon uranium enrichment despite severe damage from recent US airstrikes on its nuclear facilities. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said enrichment is halted for now, but remains a matter of national pride as talks with Europe resume Friday in Istanbul. Now we start this hour in the Middle East, where the World Health Organization said the Israeli military attacked its staff residence and main warehouse in the Gazan city of Deir al-Balah, compromising its operations in Gaza. The UN agency said the WHO staff residence was attacked 3 times, with airstrikes causing a fire and extensive damage, endangering staff and their families, including their children. Israeli tanks pushed into southern and eastern districts of Deir al-Balah for the first time on Monday, in an area where Israeli sources said the military believes hostages may be held. WHO said the Israeli military entered the premises, forcing women and children to evacuate on foot towards al-Mawasi amid active conflict. 2 WHO staff and 2 family members were also detained. The agency said in a post on X, 3 were later released, while 1 staff member remains in detention. The WHO Director General demanded the immediate release of the detained staff and protection of all its personnel. We're now joined by our guest, Dr. Emmanuel Navon, who's an international relations lecturer at Tel Aviv University and senior fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Navon, on the program. Pleasure to have you. I first want to get onto this attack that's happened at a WHO headquarters. The organisation has stated that it had provided the exact GPS coordinates of its staff residence and main warehouse to all parties, marking these sites protected under international law. What military necessity justified in targeting these clearly identified humanitarian facilities?
Well, the statement comes from the WHO itself. I haven't seen or heard yet any reaction from the Israeli Foreign Ministry or the IDF. so I have no way to verify this information. I'm speaking, of course, in my own name as an academic. And since you spoke about international law is very clear on the fact that when a civilian facility is used for military purposes, it becomes a legitimate military target. And this has been the case many times in the past, where Hamas has used civilian infrastructure such as hospital, such as mosque, or even UN facilities such as UNRWA, and that turned them into legitimate and legal military targets. And I assume that this was the case in that occurrence, even though, as I said, there has been no official reaction, and I do not know all the details.
Okay, we've got more information here coming directly from the WHO. As you've said, the IDF have not yet released a statement in regards to this. According to the WHO, male staff and their relatives were handcuffed, stripped and interrogated at gunpoint, one of which staff member allegedly remains detained. Can you detail the rules of engagement and oversight mechanisms that governed this detention, and whether any disciplinary measures will follow if protocols were breached by the Israeli Defense Forces in this situation?
Well, again, you are relying so far only on the statements coming from the WHO. We don't know how accurate they are, but the fact is, I mentioned before the involvement of Hamas terrorists with the UNRWA agency. So there have been, in fact, precedents and proven cases of UN agencies or their staff being directly and actively involved in terrorist attacks and in military activities against the IDF and against Israeli civilians. So my assumption is that in this case, those WHO workers were in fact Hamas terrorists, as was the case in the past in many instances with UNRWA, for example.
Dr. Navon, you are staying with us. We have a related development to discuss. Foreign ministers from 28 countries, along with the EU Commissioner for Equality, Preparedness and Crisis Management, have issued a joint statement calling for an immediate end to the war in Gaza. The signatories, including nations such as Australia, Canada, France, Japan and the United Kingdom, said the suffering of civilians in Gaza has reached new depths. They condemned Israel's aid delivery model, describing it as dangerous and dehumanizing, and criticized the killing of over 800 Palestinians while seeking basic necessities like food and water. The statement accused the Israeli government of denying essential humanitarian assistance and called on it to fulfill its obligations under international humanitarian law. It also condemned the continued detention of hostages by Hamas since the October the 7th attack in 2023, calling for their immediate and unconditional release. The leaders said a negotiated ceasefire is the best chance to bring them home. The signatories urged Israel to lift all restrictions on the flow of aid and to allow the UN and humanitarian organizations to carry out life-saving work safely and effectively. They also rejected any proposals to forcibly displace Palestinians into so-called humanitarian cities, warning that permanent forced displacement violates international law. We are once again joined by Dr. Navon to discuss this further. Dr. Navon, this statement comes from 28 different foreign ministers from around the world, mainly European countries, of course, but many of them former allies of Israel, still allies in some ways. However, does Israel risk alienating itself from the international community, from this community that it has built a relationship with over the years? What are your views on the mounting pressure on the Israeli government from its allies?
First of all, there's no such a thing as an international community. This expression is an oxymoron. There are 193 members of the UN. They do not constitute a community. You have different countries with different interests. Most of the countries you mentioned do belong to the free world, and the free world is indeed Israel's main ally in the struggle that we are fighting against Iran and its proxies. Now, Israel wants the war to end. It's not that we need to be asked to end the war, But the war will end the moment Hamas releases our hostages and lays down its arms. We are not fighting in Gaza out of boredom or pleasure. We are fighting in order to release our hostages and in order to make sure that Hamas never constitutes a threat again to Israel. And we shall achieve those goals. We appreciate the concern of our allies, some of which you mentioned, for the humanitarian situation in Gaza. In fact, Israel is supplying aid to the Gazan population. It is supplying humanitarian aid. And if it was supplied via Hamas, that would enable Hamas to again get an income and reinforce itself. The aid has to be supplied directly to the civilian population and not via Hamas, and this is exactly what Israel has been trying to do. So we appreciate the concern of our allies, but again, the message is very clear, and I'll repeat it again. The war will end the moment Hamas releases our hostages and lays down its arms. Before that, we will continue to fight.
Dr. Navon, one of the main focuses of this statement, of course, was the mass civilian deaths. However, the humanitarian access, which you have mentioned, there has also been a reported 800 Palestinians reportedly killed while seeking food and water, some severely criticizing the Israeli and United States-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. On what legal basis do you justify limiting and controlling humanitarian access in a conflict zone where international law mandates unimpeded relief?
International law mandates the army fighting in the territory to allow and enable the supply of humanitarian aid, which is exactly what Israel has been doing for the past 20 months of this conflict. However, in recent months, Israel has changed the mechanism so that the aid is not controlled by Hamas. As long as Hamas takes control of the aid, it makes money, it reinforces itself, and you cannot provide that aid and fight Hamas at the same time if that aid is controlled by Hamas. So Israel is in fact abiding by international law by not only allowing the supply of humanitarian aid, but supplying it itself. But this has to be supplied directly to the population and not via Hamas. As for the victims you mentioned, the so-called information comes from Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and of course it's not a reliable source of information.
Dr. Navon, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Pleasure for having you. We now move on to another related development from the Middle East. Yemen's Houthis said today that it launched a ballistic missile at Israel's Ben Gurion airport near Tel Aviv. Listen in to what the Houthi military spokesperson had to say.
القوة الصاروخية في القوات المسلحة اليمنية عملية عسكرية نوعية استهدفت مطار اللد في منطقة يافا المحتلة، وذلك بصاروخ باليستي فرط صوتي نوع فلسطين 2، وقد حققت العملية هدفها بنجاح بفضل الله، وتسببت في هروب الملايين من قطعان الصهاينة الغاصبين إلى الملاجئ وتوقف حركة المطار.
The Israeli military confirmed it has intercepted a missile launched from Yemen after air raid sirens were activated earlier today in multiple regions across the country. The launch follows an Israeli military strike on Houthi targets in Yemen's Hodeida port on Monday, part of ongoing attacks against the Iran-backed group, which has been targeting ships bound for Israel and launching missiles towards Israeli territory. We're once again joined by Dr. Navon to discuss this further. Dr. Navon, could you tell us a little bit more about the Houthi group, what threats it faces, their military, what threats they pose to Israel, their military capabilities, and the feeling in Israel about the Iran-backed proxy group right now? Okay, we move on. Iran says it will not stop enriching uranium, calling it a matter of national pride. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told Fox News that enrichment is a national achievement Iran won't abandon, despite US pressure. This comes after recent US strikes damaged Iran's nuclear sites Araghchi confirmed the damage was severe and has temporarily halted enrichment. US President Trump used those comments to validate his earlier claims, saying he'd strike again if needed. Meanwhile, no breakthrough has been made in nuclear talks. Iran will meet Russia and China this week and E3 countries. Washington and Tehran have not yet resumed direct talks since last month's strikes. We're now joined by Mark Sutherland, who's a geopolitical commentator. He joins us live from London to discuss this further. Mark, thank you very much, as always, for joining us. Mark, you have two sides here in regards to these potential talks. Do you see negotiations possible here with Tehran, given its stance that it still wants to enrich uranium? It sees it as a right of national pride. What are your thoughts, Mark?
Thomas, good to be with you. This is, in one sense, this is extremely deeply complex because we would need hours, as I often say, to go through the history. If you are looking at information that is provided by a very good site called Iranian Watch, and you go through the history of this, the Iranians then going back to the Shah, then wanting having nuclear reactors in time for electricity and not for nuclear proliferation, then this is a huge subject. And it's also backed up by the fact that, especially as the Israelis and many other people have constantly said, you are trying to negotiate with an actor that is actually not playing fair. Because what happens is when investigations are then done over time, like I think in 2009-10, where suddenly it's revealed that they had facilities like Fordow, when the Israelis then get information out of another site that was then dismantled called Parchin in 2018, when they then grabbed hold of a load of paperwork and documents, it then reveals that Iran is then aiming for two strands in regard to uranium and plutonium and ending up able to then make a nuclear weapon. And when they are denying that and saying, no, we're not doing this, and they're hiding facilities, this is extremely difficult to negotiate with. If you ask anyone within the Middle East region, we at times within the West, we don't understand. We think people are being very, very honest with us. And there is a lot of being very disingenuous on the other side, Thomas. So we're dealing with a regime that wishes to have a nuclear weapon and then wishes to use that, as far as I'm concerned, and many others, for nefarious purposes. Hence, as President Trump has said for many years, and of course, if you go back to the first administration and then in 2018, where they are then heavily putting sanctions against Iran, he has always said they cannot have a nuclear weapon. And of course, as you are fully aware of Fordow, when you put those facilities deep underground, this is deliberate because they presently they will not stop. They will seek, even after that bombing, they will seek to get what they want, which is to have the whole structure to create a nuclear weapon.
I just want to say Iran does maintain that its nuclear enrichment is for peaceful purposes only and not to make a nuclear weapon. That is what Iran says. However, Mark, let's get on to these two meetings that are going to happen later on this week. We have two opposite sides here. We have Iran meeting in Russia and with Russia and China, and also Tehran meeting with the E3 in Istanbul. What do you think these talks are going to be like? What are your prospects for them, and how different are they going to be pitched as?
I think there's going to be standoffs, personally. I mean, if you take Russia and China, of course, they have been over years providing technology, providing the will to do that, as other countries have. And if we then go into the whole BRICS discussion, this is the opposition to the West. in regard to them meeting with the E3, the European countries. I think there will be more and more stalling, frankly, Thomas. And sorry to sound so negative. It's looking back in how that they've actually handled negotiations and then pulled the wool over the Western countries in regard to that. And of course, previously, where Obama would say, this is a red line, this is a red line, the red line was always crossed, because on the one hand, they are saying to any nuclear inspectors, no, we're not doing this. But on the other hand, they are then doing many, many things secretly. That is why, in the end, there was the bombing of Fordo, etc. So there is a history here, Thomas, of being rather disingenuous with the facts that they want to reveal, and then allowing, they stop people going into the country to then be able to inspect and find out what they do have. So would they open that up? People have got to be very, very real here. We are dealing with a regime that has an ideology that says, when you're believing in that America is the big Satan and Israel is the little Satan, those things should be taken very, very seriously in their beliefs and what they say that they would do.
Yes, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us, Mark Sutherland. Always a pleasure to have you on. We now move over to the United States, where in a significant legal development, a US appeals court has allowed the Trump administration to move forward with plans to end temporary protected status, or TPS, for thousands of Afghans and Cameroonians living in the United States. This decision comes after a federal judge lifted a previous order blocking the move. The Trump administration argued that conditions in Afghanistan and Cameroon no longer warranted the protections. The ruling affects around 14,600 Afghans and 7,900 Cameroonians. Immigration advocacy groups CASA has filed a lawsuit claiming the termination of TPS was preordained. However, the appeals court ruled there was insufficient evidence to delay the action. We're now joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao, who's a fellow at the Hudson Institute, located in Tokyo, Japan. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Nagao, as always. Dr. Nagao, what are your thoughts on this, especially on the fact that Donald Trump is willing to send these immigrants back to countries that, especially Afghanistan here, are potentially dangerous for them?
Yes, the Trump administration tried to reorganize the immigration policy. In this case, only the legal immigrant can stay in the United States, and just aid purpose budget. Maybe Trump administration do not like such kind of budget, so that's why this issue is a matter of concern, because these people who stay in the United States came from the other countries, they face a very tough situation in their country, but at the same time, their contribution to the United States is a matter of concern in this case. So that's why this kind of the issue, the problem, the American budget should be used for the Americans. So that's why this is a matter. The problem is this, especially in case of the Afghanistan, these Afghan immigrant came from Afghanistan is indeed working for the American military or working for the American policy in Afghanistan. So that's why they got the right to stay in Afghanistan. When these cases, there are many these cases. So that's why they have already contributed to U.S. interest in the past. The problem is since 2021, the U.S. withdrew, and now the 2025, the 5 years has gone. So this means that the United States start to say, you have already spent the 5 years, so you should adjust the American, but if you are keeping the Afghanistan people, you should return to Afghanistan. The problem is Afghanistan government is still Taliban, and the Taliban do not allow many things. So this is special and strange government. So that's why this is dangerous. But at the same time, this aid is not forever, America is starting to say.
Yes, Dr. Nagao, thank you very much. You are staying with us to discuss more United States developments. Now, in a major release, the US Justice Department has made over 240,000 pages of documents public related to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The files include records from the FBI, which had long surveilled the civil rights leader as part of an effort to discredit him. Dr. King was killed on the 4th of April in 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, during a time of widespread civil unrest. US President Donald Trump signed an order in January calling for these files to be released, continuing his promise of increased transparency about the assassination of King, Robert F. Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy. King's family has asked the public to approach the documents with empathy and respect, reiterating their belief that their father was the victim of a broader conspiracy. These new revelations are part of an ongoing effort to shed light on the turbulent and controversial history surrounding Dr. King's assassination and the FBI surveillance of him. We're once again joined by Dr. Nagao to discuss this. Dr. Nagao, how might the release of these FBI files affect global perception of US commitment to human rights and transparency, especially in this time and this opposition that Donald Trump is facing over the Epstein files?
Releasing the information and publishing information the government took is a good thing in the democratic country generally. So that's why the releasing itself is not wrong. The problem in this case is in case of Martin Luther King, that time the FBI tried to damage the image of Martin Luther King. That was the operation that time, and they they collect information and create something the new image of Martin Luther King. So if the government release this information outside, it looks like some certain number of the people understand that this is a new image of Martin Luther King FBI setup, and the current image is damaged. That is a concerning point of the relative of Martin Luther King, family of the Martin Luther King side. So releasing itself, generally this is the rule of the democracy, it is very good. But at the same time, what kind of information government will release is when people talk about the result of this releasing, they start worry. But generally, releasing itself is a good thing because transparency is important.
Yes.
In case of the other cases you mentioned, this is different case, maybe case by case we should mention, because this is the issue in the past, but you mentioned is the issue just now, so impact is completely different, I think. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Nagao, thank you. You are staying with us to discuss things further. We move over to South America now, where Brazil's Supreme Court has threatened to arrest former President Jair Bolsonaro for violating a social media ban. The Supreme Court has also frozen the assets of Eduardo Bolsonaro. Justice Alexander de Morales gave Bolsonaro's lawyers 24 hours to explain why he spoke to journalists in a way that later appeared online. Bolsonaro, now required to wear an ankle monitor, is accused of plotting a coup and seeking support from US President Donald Trump. The court orders bars him from social media, even through third parties. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has condemned the ruling, calling it a witch hunt and imposing visa sanctions on Morales and his family. The court's decision has sparked debate in Brazil over whether Bolsonaro is being unfairly silenced. We're once again joined by Dr. Nagao to discuss this. Dr. Nagao, what does the Supreme Court's threat to arrest the former head of state signal about the balance of power between Brazil's judiciary and executive?
Yes, that is an important matter. But anyway, this is a political battle, even if the judicial system is a matter of concern. Currently, it is interesting because the second second Trump administration focusing on the network of the right-wing party in the world. including Bolsonaro, Bolsonaro supporters. So that's why in case of the political battle in Brazil, it's related with the U.S. policy just now. So Trump administration has the will to support Bolsonaro's status in Brazil, and so if the current ruler-led government in the Brazil try to cracking down the Bolsonaro supporters, it will affect the U.S.-Brazil relations. And just now, the son of Bolsonaro visit Washington, D.C., and so it will directly link with the U.S.-Brazil relation, I think. So, well, it's general. So, democratic way is important, but at the same time, how to manage this kind of division of the opinion is current trend matters in the many parts of the world, including this Brazil, I think.
Yes, Dr. Nagel, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to have you on the programme. Now we move north to our next story, in fact, where in a major development, Venezuela's Attorney General Tarek Saab has announced an investigation into top El Salvadorian officials over allegations of abuse against detainees. Let's listen in to what they said.
Hemos decidido abrir una investigación formal con el número de expediente respectivo, con los 3 fiscales nacionales designados a los siguientes funcionarios de El Salvador. A Nayib Armando Bukele, sátrapa que viola la propia constitución salvadoreña y se llama a sí mismo presidente de El Salvador. Héctor Gustavo Villatoro, ministro de Justicia y Seguridad Pública de El Salvador. Y Osiris Luna Mesa, director general de Centros Penales y viceministro de Justicia y Seguridad Pública de ese país.
The investigation will focus on claims of abuse at a Salvadorian prison where Venezuelan migrants were detained after being deported by the US earlier this year. Attorney General Saab is now calling for international attention on the matter. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Casi todos, una gran mayoría, fue abusada sexualmente, agredidos sexualmente por los custodios, cuando los llevaban a la celda de castigo. Sufrieron torturas sistemáticas que incluyeron golpizas diarias y constantes por parte de los custodios. A esto se agrega recibir alimentación en estado de descomposición y agua no potable que le generó enfermedades gástricas.
Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.